This episode of the Crimson Post is brought to you by my Patreon supporters, including Sherry Harper, who is currently supporting at the $10 level. Remember, the 5th of November, the gunpowder treason and plot. I know no reason the gunpowder treason should ever be forgot.
Salutations, and welcome to the Crimson Post. I am your host, the Crimson Gentleman, and in this episode we are talking about V for Vendetta. V for Vendetta is a movie that has attached to it a very special date. It is a date that is very special among fans, and that is the 5th of November. It is actually sort of a tradition in my family to watch V for Vendetta every 5th of November. It's a fun thing we like to do. And so for this 5th of November, I decided to post an episode about it, which is why this episode was delayed from yesterday on Monday till today on Tuesday. But before we get into that main topic, we do have our usual segments from beforehand. This week, we don't really have any follow-up from last episode. I pretty much said everything I want to say about Zombieland 2, but we do still have the riddle from last week. So last week's riddle was, I have a neck, but no head, 2 arms, but no hands. What am I? Now, an interesting thing about riddles is that a lot of times with good riddles, what you'll see them do, and you can kind of keep this in mind to help you figure out riddles in the future, is that if the riddle is about an object, then they will personify that object. They will make it seem like it's something that's alive to sort of confuse you, to put you in the wrong state of mind. Or if it is a living thing, if the answer is a cow or a goat or something like that, then they will objectify it. They will refer to it as if it is a thing rather than a living animal. That can sort of start to give you a hint as toward how to think about it. It's also interesting that it's almost the exact opposite of a Rec Room character, because no neck but have a head, and no arms, but they do have hands. So, the answer to the riddle is a shirt. Because shirts have necks and arms, but no heads or hands. Unless, of course, it's some kind of shirt that has gloves attached to it, which is fairly rare, I think. Anyway, if you liked that one, which I will grant is a rather simple one, do stick around for the riddle at the end of this week's episode. So with that, we're going to be moving on to our main topic, V for Vendetta. This movie, we'll start with the stats, as usual. It was released on March 17th, 2006. It had an opening weekend of $25 million. And the world over, domestically it made $70 million. And throughout the world, it made $132 million, so almost double that. Which means it was a fairly successful movie. It actually did better in its opening weekend than Zombieland 2 did. So, look at that. And this was back in 2006, where, the value of a dollar was slightly less than it is now. So, also, on Rotten Tomatoes, the aggregate score from all of the critics is 72%, and the audience score is 90%. So yet another case of the critics and the fans, the audience, having quite a bit different take on the movie and how they felt about it. Though it may be a bit skewed on the audience side because since the movie is relatively old, probably nowadays most of the reviews it gets are from people who enjoy the movie. So it's possible that most of the people who wouldn't like the movie or didn't like the movie didn't go on Rotten Tomatoes at the time. And so really the only audience scores it gets are fairly high audience scores, people who like it enough to come onto the site and rate it that way. So there is that to keep in mind. The movie itself. This movie, I'm less going to go into a play-by-play of what happened and more go into details about the movie and the story and the plot and interesting things, stuff I thought about it, things I like, and a little bit about the differences between the comic book and the movie, because it is based on a comic. So, anyone who has not seen the movie, I would recommend you go and watch it now to celebrate the day, or even if it's not the 5th of November anymore, it is definitely a movie worth seeing, at least one time, just to see what you think about it. For those of you who left and saw the movie and came back or have already seen it, we are going to talk about it. It's basically going to be spoilers all the way through, but mostly in its ideas and concepts and less in the actual plot of the film. But I'm not going to hold back, and specific things might slip through. So the movie, of course, is about a vigilante revolutionary who goes by V, and he wears a Guy Fawkes mask and a pretty much all-black getup. He affects the image of Guy Fawkes because, to him, Guy Fawkes represents the will of the people fighting back against a corrupt government. And that's exactly the scenario we find ourselves in at the beginning of the movie. The movie itself is all about the way we as a society could end up giving our governments too much power. And this is almost a difference between the movie and the book itself, because in the comic, the party is not elected into power. What happens is that the world is basically completely destroyed, not 100%, but society has collapsed. There is no longer a government running the country of England. And most of the other countries in the world seem to have disappeared completely. And much of England itself has been flooded permanently, the countryside especially. And then because of this, there is a power vacuum, and a number of different groups fight with each other trying to regain power. And it ends up being that a very bad government takes power, which to me, I don't think is as good or as appropriate to life today. Since if all of the governments that we have spent so long trying to build up did collapse, it would make sense that what would get installed immediately afterward would be installed by the most ruthless people left. And so I don't know that there's much we could do as a society to prevent this from happening. Things we could do after the fact, absolutely. That's how we got to where we are now in the first place, because governments used to be this way, just without modern technology. But in the movie, it is a bit more of a warning than that, because in the movie, the party and the chancellor were elected into power. the world was starting to fall apart, but in order to save it, in order to stop it from falling apart, the people voted to give the government more power. And that's something that, one, we could warn against and actually try to ensure doesn't happen today, because two, it's something that even today seems like it could happen. And the movie, which came out in 2006, 13 years ago, is actually, I think, more relevant today than it ever has been. The comic itself was originally published, the first issue was published in September of 1988. And the story is scarily only getting more relevant. The society in the movie is basically ran very similarly to 1984 by George Orwell. And V, like many people, who most of them won't admit this, does not like the way that the government is run. When you find out that's not really his main motivation, specifically, it's more that he has a vendetta against a certain group of people who have happened to use what they did to him to get into power of the government. And since, it's sort of while he's here, he may as well start a revolution, kind of. He really does believe in it, but he also specifically wants to kill these people because of his vendetta against them. So maybe he would handle it a bit differently, wouldn't kill them at all, just try to focus on the blowing up of Parliament if it weren't for what they did to him. Maybe he would have done both anyway, and he just has an extra reason. But the whole movie is about symbols and how they're used, and how they can be used for good, how symbols can be used for bad. V has his V and his mask as his symbols of the will of the people and their right to govern themselves, while on the other side, there is the government's symbol, which is the black background with the red line down and two red lines going across. It's also a very well-designed symbol. It's simple, but menacing looking. And it's showing, throughout the movie, you see this back and forth between symbols being used for good and being used for ill. So V also meets Evie, who is a young girl that he saves from some fingermen, and he brings her along for the ride. And throughout the movie, from then on, she almost serves as a surrogate of the audience, someone to learn about V and his cause through, and it sort of mirrors, I suppose, how the audience is supposed to react to the things V's doing. Maybe we're a bit iffy about him at first, but slowly, as he explains himself more and we see what he's doing and we learn about the past, we start to come more onto his side. Though I think most people agree with him a bit faster than Evie does. The movie itself is also packed with action, a bit of humor, some really interesting ideas, and is definitely a fun experience, even if, for whatever reason, you don't really agree with or care about the sort of political side of the movie itself. It's still very good, very much worth watching. So with that, definitely see the movie if you haven't seen it ever, or maybe if you just haven't seen it in a while. And have a happy 5th, everyone. England prevails. So with that, we are going to move on to our closing segments of the podcast. We would have more than just the one, but so far there haven't really been very many comments on the videos. But if you all would like to leave some comments down below, I would be very happy to comment on them in myself in the comments, respond to them, or perhaps read them off in the next episode next week. So if you're interested, do get on that. But for now, we are going to move on to our final segment of the show, which is Crimson Conundrums. This week's puzzler is rather short, and that can be good. It can actually make a riddle much more difficult if it's short, as long as it still maintains 1 to a maximum, I'd say, of 3 possible answers. So make it, anytime if you're ever trying to make a riddle, try to make it as short as it can be while still perfectly describing the object and nothing else, if you can help it. So this one's a bit short, maybe a little bit difficult. I'll be very interested to see how many of you are able to guess it or figure it out. So this week's riddle is, what has a heart but no other organs? Okay. What has a heart but no other organs? So that's going to be the riddle for the week. Give it a bit to figure out, and I'll be back with the answer on Monday. So I'll see you all in the next episode. Farewell.